You're lying in bed at 2 a.m., scrolling through your phone, and suddenly you're hit with this overwhelming feeling. Is this it? Is this all there is? You look at your life, the job that pays the bills but drains your soul, the social media feeds full of people performing happiness, the endless cycle of work, spend, sleep, repeat, and you can't shake the feeling that you're trapped in a machine you never chose to be part of. But here's the thing that's really messing with your head. You can't even imagine what else is possible. When you try to picture a different kind of life, a different kind of world, your mind goes blank. It's not that you don't want things to be different. It's that you literally cannot conceive of how they could be different. You feel stuck not just in your circumstances, but stuck in your ability to imagine beyond them. This isn't your personal failure of imagination. This isn't because you're not creative or visionary enough. What you're experiencing is what the late cultural critic Mark Fisher called capitalist realism. The pervasive belief that capitalism is not only the best economic system, but the only possible one. It's the feeling that Margaret Thatcher's infamous phrase, "there is no alternative," isn't just political rhetoric, but actual truth about reality itself. Mark Fisher, who tragically took his own life in 2017, spent his career mapping the psychological landscape of late capitalism. His work reveals something devastating. The system hasn't just captured your labor and your money, it has captured your imagination. Your sense of being stuck isn't just economic or social, it's ontological. It's about the very nature of what you believe is possible in existence itself. But here's what Fisher understood that most people miss. This feeling of being trapped in an inevitable system is not natural. It's manufactured. Capitalist realism isn't reality. It's a carefully constructed illusion designed to make you believe that the current arrangement of power is as fixed and unchangeable as the laws of physics. And once you see how this illusion works, once you understand the mechanics of how your imagination has been colonized, you can begin to reclaim it. Fisher's analysis doesn't just diagnose the problem, it points toward possibilities for what he called post-capitalist desire. The way out of feeling stuck begins with understanding exactly how you got stuck in the first place. Fisher identified something unprecedented in human history. We live in the first era where the future has been cancelled. Not literally, of course. Time keeps moving forward, but culturally, psychologically, imaginatively, we have lost the ability to conceive of a future that is genuinely different from the present. Think about science fiction from the 1960s and 70s. Shows like Star Trek imagined post-scarcity societies where money had been abolished, where work was voluntary, where technology served human flourishing rather than corporate profit. These weren't just entertainment. They were exercises in collective imagination, explorations of genuine alternatives to existing arrangements. Now look at contemporary science fiction. Even our most optimistic visions of the future are still fundamentally capitalist. In movies like In Time, people literally pay with years of their lives. In Black Mirror, technology amplifies existing power relations rather than transforming them. Fisher called this cyberpunk stagnation, our inability to imagine technological advancement leading to social transformation. We can envision artificial intelligence, but we cannot envision the end of wage labor. We can imagine colonizing Mars, but not abolishing homelessness on Earth. You feel stuck because you're living in what Fisher called the eternal present, a temporal prison where the future has been reduced to the repetition of the present with minor modifications. Innovation becomes iteration. Change becomes optimization. Revolution becomes disruption. but only the kind that creates new markets rather than new possibilities for human existence. Fisher made a crucial connection that most analysts miss. There's a direct relationship between the structure of late capitalism and the epidemic of mental illness, particularly depression, that characterizes our era. But it's not just that capitalism makes people depressed. It's that capitalism requires a specific kind of depression to function. He called it depressive hedonia, the paradoxical state of being simultaneously overstimulated and undersatisfied, constantly consuming pleasure, but never experiencing joy. You binge-watch Netflix series but feel empty afterward. You scroll through social media for hours but feel more disconnected. You buy things online, but the packages arrive feeling like obligations rather than gifts to yourself. This isn't accidental. Late capitalism has learned to profit from your dissatisfaction by providing endless stimulation that never quite satisfies. The system needs you to be perpetually hungry for more content, more products, more experiences, but never actually full. Satisfaction would mean the end of consumption, and consumption is the engine of growth. Fisher analyzed how this creates what he called depressive realism, the accurate perception that the pleasures offered by the system are ultimately hollow, combined with the inability to imagine anything else. You see through the bullshit, but you can't see beyond it. You know that your job is meaningless, but you can't imagine meaningful work. Your depression might not be a chemical imbalance to be corrected. It might be your mind's accurate assessment that something is fundamentally wrong with how life is organized in this society. The problem isn't that you can't function in the system. The problem is that the system is dysfunctional for human flourishing. One of Fisher's most important insights concerns how capitalist realism operates not as an explicit ideology, but as the absence of ideology, as simply how things are. This is what makes it so powerful and so difficult to resist. You've probably never been asked to pledge allegiance to capitalism. You've never recited a capitalist creed or saluted a corporate flag, but you've been immersed in capitalist assumptions from birth. That competition is natural. That profit motive drives innovation. That market solutions are always preferable to collective action. These assumptions feel like common sense because they're everywhere. In movies, TV shows, news reports, educational curricula, even in the spatial organization of cities and suburbs. Fisher called this unconscious ideology, beliefs that operate below the level of conscious awareness, shaping perception and possibility without ever being explicitly stated or defended. When someone says, "There is no alternative to capitalism," they're not making a political argument. They're describing what feels like a fact about the universe. Fisher showed how this unconscious ideology operates through what he called interpassivity, the delegation of our own agency to external systems. You don't have to actively believe in capitalism. The system believes for you. Fisher identified one of the most soul-crushing aspects of late capitalism: the transformation of every aspect of life into bureaucratic procedures. This isn't just about government bureaucracy. It's about how market logic has infected everything, turning human relationships into transactions and genuine activities into performance metrics. Think about your job. Even if you work in a supposedly creative field, you probably spend more time documenting your work than actually doing it. You fill out timesheets, attend meetings about meetings, complete assessments that assess your assessment completion. Fisher called this capitalist bureaucracy, the proliferation of administrative tasks that serve no human purpose but generate data for managerial systems. But it's not just work. Education has become about standardized testing rather than learning. Healthcare has become about insurance processing rather than healing. Even friendship gets mediated through social media platforms that quantify your interactions and monetize your relationships. Fisher connected this bureaucratization to what he called market Stalinism, the paradox that a system supposedly based on efficiency and innovation has created the most inefficient and stagnant bureaucratic apparatus in human history. You spend hours on hold with customer service, navigating phone trees designed to discourage you from actually reaching a human being. The bureaucracy doesn't just waste your time, it colonizes your imagination, making market-based solutions feel like the only possible responses to human needs. Fisher analyzed how economic precarity, the absence of secure employment, predictable income, or reliable social support, functions not just as economic hardship, but as a form of psychological control. When you're constantly worried about money, you don't have the mental space to think about systematic alternatives. Precarity creates what Fisher called depressive time, a temporal experience where the future becomes unpredictable and the present becomes overwhelming. You can't plan beyond the next paycheck, can't commit to long-term projects, can't imagine retirement or security. This temporal fragmentation makes collective organizing extremely difficult. When you're working multiple gig jobs, when your income fluctuates wildly from month to month, when you're one medical emergency away from bankruptcy, you don't have the luxury of thinking about abstract political alternatives. Your imagination gets trapped in survival mode, focused on immediate problems rather than systematic solutions. But Fisher revealed the cruel irony. The very precarity that prevents you from imagining alternatives is itself produced by the system that claims to be the only alternative. Your economic insecurity isn't natural or inevitable. It's the result of specific policy choices, technological implementations, and power arrangements that could be organized differently. Your precarity serves the system by keeping you dependent on whatever work is available, grateful for whatever income you can get, unable to demand better conditions or imagine alternative arrangements. Fisher called this precarity as governance, the use of economic insecurity as a tool of political control. One of Fisher's most insightful observations concerns how capitalism has privatized what should be collective problems, issues that previous generations understood as social or political. Unemployment, housing insecurity, mental illness, educational failure have been reframed as individual problems requiring individual solutions. When you're stressed about money, you're told you need better financial planning. When you're depressed about work, you're told you need better work-life balance. When you can't afford housing, you're told you need to improve your skills or move to a cheaper area. The problems are systematic, but the solutions offered are always individual. This privatization of stress serves capitalist realism by making systematic alternatives literally unthinkable. If unemployment is a personal failing rather than a structural feature of capitalism, then you can't imagine full employment as a policy goal. If mental illness is a brain chemistry problem rather than a reasonable response to unreasonable conditions, then you can't imagine changing the conditions that produce mental distress. Fisher showed how this privatization operates through what he called therapeutic discourse, the translation of political problems into psychological categories. Instead of asking why work is so alienating, we're asked how to cope with work-related stress. Instead of questioning why education is so competitive and anxiety-provoking, we're offered techniques for managing test anxiety. The therapeutic approach isn't wrong. People do need support dealing with difficult conditions. But when therapy becomes the only available response to systematic problems, it functions as a form of political pacification. Your anger at injustice gets pathologized as anger management issues. Your resistance to exploitation gets diagnosed as adjustment disorder. Perhaps Fisher's most devastating insight concerns how capitalism has learned to absorb and monetize its own criticism. Every form of rebellion, every expression of dissatisfaction, every attempt at alternative culture gets rapidly incorporated into market opportunities. Punk rock becomes a fashion aesthetic. Environmentalism becomes green capitalism. Social justice becomes corporate diversity initiatives. Even anti-capitalist critiques become content for Netflix documentaries and university courses that prepare students for careers in the very system being criticized. Fisher called this capitalist capture, the system's ability to metabolize its own contradictions and transform resistance into revenue streams. This creates what he described as reflexive impotence, the simultaneous awareness that the system is problematic and the feeling that resistance is futile because it will just be absorbed and monetized. You can see this everywhere. Companies selling Che Guevara t-shirts, banks funding documentaries about economic inequality, tech billionaires appropriating Buddhist mindfulness practices. The system doesn't suppress criticism, it commercializes it, turning dissent into products and revolution into brand identity. This capture operates not just at the level of culture, but at the level of subjectivity itself. Your desire for authenticity becomes a market for authentic experiences. Your need for meaning becomes a market for life coaching and spiritual retreats. Your longing for community becomes a market for networking events and social apps. Fisher's analysis might seem overwhelming, but it contains the seeds of liberation. The first step in moving beyond capitalist realism is recognizing that it is a construction rather than a natural fact. Once you understand that your sense of being stuck is produced rather than inevitable, you can begin to imagine unsticking yourself. Fisher advocated for what he called consciousness raising. Not just individual awakening, but collective processes of recognizing shared conditions and shared possibilities. Your feeling of being trapped isn't unique to you. It's a common experience produced by common conditions. This recognition opens space for collective rather than individual responses. The goal isn't to escape the system as an individual. That's impossible and politically useless. The goal is to create what Fisher called cracks in the system, spaces where alternative logics can operate, where different ways of organizing life can be practiced and developed. These cracks might be small at first. Community gardens that operate outside market logic, skill-sharing networks that bypass monetary exchange, creative collectives that prioritize artistic vision over commercial viability, mutual aid networks that provide support without profit motive. But Fisher understood that these alternatives can only develop if they're connected to broader cultural and political movements. Individual lifestyle changes aren't enough. The system is too powerful and pervasive to be escaped through personal choices alone. Fisher's most hopeful concept was post-capitalist desire, the possibility of wanting things that capitalism cannot provide. This isn't just about different economic arrangements, but about different ways of being human, different relationships to time, space, nature, creativity, and each other. Post-capitalist desire might involve wanting meaningful work rather than just employment, wanting genuine community rather than just networking opportunities, wanting creative expression rather than just content creation, wanting ecological harmony rather than just sustainable consumption. But these desires can only emerge when capitalist realism begins to crack, when the feeling that there is no alternative starts to weaken. Fisher believed this was already happening. In the financial crisis of 2008, in climate activism, in the increasing recognition that the system isn't working for most people. Your feeling of being stuck might actually be the beginning of wanting something unstuck. Your depression about current conditions might be the first stirring of desire for different conditions. Your sense that something is fundamentally wrong might be the starting point for imagining something fundamentally different. Fisher's work suggests that the exit from capitalist realism won't come through rational argument or individual lifestyle changes. It will come through the emergence of new forms of desire, new ways of imagining human possibility, new practices of living that demonstrate alternatives to market logic. You feel stuck because you've been told that stuck is all there is. But Fisher's analysis reveals that this stuckness is manufactured, maintained, and therefore changeable. The first step in getting unstuck is recognizing that your individual feeling of being trapped is actually a collective condition requiring collective solutions. The machine you feel trapped in isn't as solid as it appears. It's held together by belief, habit, and the absence of alternatives. But alternatives are always possible. They just need to be imagined, desired, and practiced into existence. Mark Fisher called this communist realism, the belief that collective ownership of the means of production and genuine democracy are not only possible but inevitable once enough people recognize their necessity. Whether or not you agree with that specific vision, his broader point remains crucial. Realism about capitalism's failures is the beginning of realism about post-capitalist possibilities. Your sense of being stuck is trying to tell you something important. This isn't all there is. The question is whether you'll listen to what your stuckness is revealing about the world, and whether you'll join with others who are working to unstick not just themselves, but the world itself.